think the thing that really makes the food scene in Tasmania is our proximity to the good food and the good wine. You know, we've got little ladies growing beautiful vegetables in West Hobart and things like that. Like going to visit producers and farmers is really easy.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. In the last 15 years, there have been key moments that have altered the path of Tasmania's culinary landscape. Some point to the opening of Mona, others to the throng of industry professionals looking to get out of the big cities and embrace a slower-paced life. But well-travelled and highly skilled local professionals have been the driving force that have not only shined a light on the extraordinary wine and produce of the Apple Isle, but created a dynamic and enticing dining scene. Alice Chugg is the restaurant manager of Templo in Hobart. Alice, how are you going?
Good, Anthony. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
The culinary scene's just really blossomed in Tasmania, particularly over the last 5 to 10 years. What's it been like for you as a local and being a real driving force and part of that?
Oh, it's been actually so amazing to see it change and to be kind of a part of that change. I remember my first kind of, I suppose fancy restaurant job. I was 18 working at a place called Mark IV, which doesn't exist anymore. And there was like 2 good restaurants in Hobart to go to.
Wow.
Because, it wasn't food-based tourism. It was, business and more kind of, I suppose, nature-focused tourism for people wanting to hike and get into the wilderness.
Yeah.
But, you fast forward, 12 years to now, and it's amazing. There's this like plethora of great venues to go to, and, you've got your pick of the bunch.
It's really different in Tasmania, and it could be due to the fact that you're your own island and there's lots of amazing produce there.
Yeah.
How do you describe the food and restaurant scene of Tasmania?
I don't know. I think it's kind of a community down here, I suppose. Like it's a little bit less competition than I suppose there could be in other states around Australia. But I think the thing that really makes the food scene in Tasmania is our proximity to the good food and the good wine. We've got little ladies growing beautiful vegetables in West Hobart, 15 minutes away from the restaurant.
Wow.
And things like that, like going to visit producers and farmers is really easy. You hop in the car, maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours max, and we can go to these incredible farms. And I think that people kind of expect that in Tasmania, like having access to that kind of produce. But yeah, I don't know how to describe it other than everyone seems to be interested down here. Everyone's interested in where their produce comes from and where their meat is from and where the wine is from.
I guess it gives it a real sense of local identity then, that what features in the restaurants. And you've been a part of many of the restaurants in the last last 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
Where did it all start for you? Where did you get interested in starting in the hospitality industry?
Well, I first got started in hospitality when I was about 16. I did work experience at a restaurant. And, it was mainly, I thought I wanted to be a chef. I tell you what, my mind has certainly changed over the last 15 years. But I did work experience in a restaurant, and then I ended up getting a job just as like a casual from that. I just really liked the people when I was interested in food, and, I was underage then, so I wasn't, the wine wasn't necessarily a focus for me at the time. But yeah, I just gradually kind of became more and more interested and realised that I was actually pretty good at it, and then kind of decided that I wanted to push myself and work in some really good restaurants. And then I think the restaurant that I mentioned before, Mark IV, was where I really started to become interested in wine especially, and food and wine matching, which is still something I love so much. And
You've worked in restaurants like Ethos and Franklin and
Yeah.
Can you take us back to those early days and the early days of your career and what it was like working like with Ethos and what they were doing at the time?
I feel like, in a way, Ethos kind of like spoiled me, gave me very high expectations of other venues to come because, Ian did everything himself. Everything was done by hand and everything was so carefully thought out and curated and everything was sourced locally and as ethically produced as possible, which, became my passion as well. But it was amazing. We were the only ones, at that time kind of doing that. And then obviously Garage East came on the scene and they were following a similar ethos, for lack of a better word. But it was kind of really hard at the same time, trying to preach to the people as to why, these vegetables or these certain things were so special because, a lot of people didn't, really see the merit in beautiful vegetables at that time. But, back then it was just 2 restaurants to go to in the city.
You mentioned how much the restaurants have changed and also the reasons why people go to Tasmania. What's been some of the challenges as, front of house and running restaurants over the last decade with that transition and getting people to change their mindset about restaurants in Tasmania?
I think people just, maybe didn't have lower expectations, but maybe didn't know what to expect, coming to Tasmania. And, Ethos, before we extended, was quite a small restaurant and, turning people away and not having a good option as to where to send them alternatively was quite hard. But then also things like, you'd have people who are quite wealthy and they'd want to come in and they'd want to spend a lot of money, and we didn't have that kind of wine list originally that, people could drop a couple $100 on a bottle of wine like they wanted to do. But I don't know, I think it was just everyone was kind of learning, the tourists and us at the same time, as to what to expect from Tasmania. I think for me, the biggest, I suppose, hurdle was I was only 20 when Ethos opened, and trying to be taken seriously as a young woman in the industry was quite difficult.
What's been some of the influences on the way that have steered your career in the way that it's gone?
I don't know, just learning, I suppose, and just really wanting to be the best that I can be, which sounds super cheesy. But and working with Chloe Proud, so we started working together, in Ethos whenever that was 8-9 years ago. And she's still my best friend to this day. But the two of us just, I don't know, we wanted to create a warm and hospitable environment, and I think that's the thing that's kind of driven me. So having the knowledge, but also wanting people to feel welcome and comfortable in restaurants. We've all had those experiences in restaurants where it's not very comfortable and you do feel a little bit like, I don't know, you're in the way or someone's doing you a favour by serving you. So we just really wanted to, I don't know, get rid of that stigma and just be friendly, and it's like you're welcoming someone into your home.
Well, the restaurants in Tasmania really have that sense about them now, and they do have that real connection to the local produce. Tell me about summer from a food perspective in Tasmania. What does it mean to you?
Oh, it's amazing. Like, this time of the year is my favourite time of the year for food, and spring as well. Like, it's kind of almost like feast or famine throughout the year in Tasmania. You've got that really awkward stretch in kind of winter and autumn where there's not a lot of vegetables available. If you are a restaurant that works seasonally, you've got a hell of a lot of onions and lots of brassicas and not a lot else. And, working somewhere like Franklin, Ethos, Templo, restaurants that are driven by, like, the seasons, it's kind of really funny to see, the boys slogging it out in the kitchen trying to think of something different to do with kale for the 1000th time. And then, come to this time of the year when it's just amazing abundance of, peas and beans and all the really fun things. Tomatoes are about to come into season. it's just, it's exciting. It kind of almost like refreshes you a little bit in the time of the year, which is generally the hardest and the busiest.
You mentioned earlier that you came into the industry at an age where you weren't allowed to drink alcohol legally, but but it became your thing, and you're one of Australia's best somms and restaurant managers, and food and wine matching is a real passion of yours. Tell us about the wine of Tasmania and how you integrate that in the menus of the various restaurants that you've worked at.
Yeah, so originally kind of Ethos started off as a mostly Tasmanian heavy wine list. There was some other stuff as well, like some French and Italian to balance it out, just fill the areas that Tasmania can't fill. But I spent a lot of time getting to know some of the Tassie producers just over, years of supplying their wine. And there's guys that I absolutely love and will always want their wine on any list that I write. But I think a lot of people have maybe a, misconception of Tasmanian wine as, yes, there are some amazing small producers who are, doing everything how you would hope they are. But there's the big kind of contract winemakers. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But, people think that all Tasmanian wine is great because they see the really great stuff. But for me, I suppose it's been finding those producers who I really love, who are pretty much all small producer, hands-on, doing everything themselves and supporting them. So I think particularly with the food kind of scene shifting a little bit and produce, and everyone wants, organically grown, vegetables and fruit and less chemicals. I think that's a kind of trend that's being followed in the wine industry here as well, particularly with those smaller growers moving away from chemicals, but not so much full natural production. You've got a few guys doing that kind of thing here. But I think that's kind of, the way that the wine is going in Tasmania, and that's my personal passion, like minimal intervention wines. I would always like to have a Tasmanian wine on a list above, something imported or something from mainland Australia. But until quite recently, we just haven't had the variety, I suppose. And there's only so much Tasmanian Pinot that you can have on a list.
Well, a lot of people like to go on road trips to different wine regions like the Barossa or the Hunter Valley.
Yeah.
And we speak of the region in that sense, but can you give us an idea of how wine is grown and the regions in Tasmania, and what sort of do you have any examples of wines that really stand out in the different regions there?
Yeah, so Port Tassie kind of, you are known as like Barossa Valley, Adelaide Hills, McLaren Vale, but Port Tassie kind of just gets lumped in its own, like Tasmania is the region itself. But there's amazing kind of like microclimates around the state, and also, different terroir, which obviously makes very different wines. But, you've got the Pipers River region, so up in the northeast of the state, which is where the majority of the sparkling gets made. So things like House of Arras, Delamere, all like Clover Hill, all those guys are kind of in that same Pipers River region. I love Delamere for sparkling in Tassie. I think it's like the best bang for your buck bottle of bubbles you can buy in the state. Always a sucker for Arras as well, but obviously that's on the slightly more higher price point. And then, you've got the Tamar Valley, which is like kind of around the outskirts of Launceston, and so many vineyards in that kind of area. You've got the big guys like Joseph Cromie that everyone knows. Then you've got smaller producers like Joe at Stony Rise, who does Stony Rise and Holyman, one of my favourite producers in the state. And he's just built a beautiful, swanky new cellar door, which is really worth a visit. But he makes, excellent Pinot Noir and Chardonnay particularly, but then has also been planting some kind of new fun varieties like Gruner Veltliner and Trousseau, things that you don't see in Tasmania, let alone in Australia very much. And Ricky Evans from Two Ton, Tasmania. So he kind of makes lots of different stuff Riesling and Pinot predominantly in that area. And his wines are so excellent in a couple of tiers. So like a more entry-level kind of wine and then some more premium stuff. And then you head towards Hobart and you get the Derwent Valley, where you've got guys like Stefano Lubiana, who are, you know, so well known around the country. And they're producing beautiful, biodynamically grown wines now, and growing some really fun varietals as well, which you don't really get to see out and about yet, but they're doing Grüne Veltliner, and they've made some Blaufränkisch and
Wow.
like that. Yeah, I know. It's like, it kind of makes sense to grow those things in Tasmania. So hopefully they continue that, and, you know, but their sparkling is great. I do love their sparkling too. And then you have like the Coal River Valley, which is the stretch out towards Richmond, kind of on the way to the airport there, and kind of similar to the Tamar Valley. You get lots of different varietals grown in that area. That's where the main Frogmore Creek vineyard is, and lots of tiny little producers as well. And that's where you have a lot of the guys who are just super small, and basically they just grow the grapes and then sell their grapes to other like big wineries and big producers. So, you know, like Hardy's buy most of their fruit for their sparkling from Tasmania, and kind of all the big dogs do, because it, you know, the Tasmanian fruit is a premium, I suppose.
There's a real art and skill in matching food and wine. How do you approach it?
Taste everything. Like, you know, you have these ideas in your head of a wine's going to work well with a dish, and sometimes it's so wrong. We always, you know, we were at Ethos and at Franklin, we always tried the dishes with the wine, and you think that something's going to work and it's actually so disgusting together. But just tasting, and I suppose knowing what to try to match just comes from practice, for lack of a better word, and palate. So, you know, knowing that if something's kind of like salty and rich, you want something kind of fresh and acidic to kind of cut that. Or sometimes you want something kind of like oily and rich to go with it. It's, I don't know, almost like intuition, for lack of a better word. But I like to keep it pretty fun as well. We challenge people a bit with our matches. At Franklin particularly, we kind of changed it up a lot. Like, we always matched beers and sake as well, and we never followed a traditional sparkling white, red, sweet wine with our matches. It was kind of all over the place. You could have a sake to start with, a white wine, a really heavily skin contact wine. You might have a red and then have a white again. Like, it was just kind of all over the place, just depending on whatever matched that dish specifically. And we kind of do the same at Templo. We don't really follow any kind of recipe for the matches. We just do whatever we think works well with the dishes. So some nights you might not get a red wine at all. It might be all whites and maybe an orange wine in there as well. And then some nights there's a lot of reds. It's just kind of, it's just fun. Like, we change it up a bit, give people something that they may not expect. And it's kind of a really good opportunity for people to try wines they might not normally order off a wine list themselves.
Franklin is a restaurant that got a lot of media attention, and you spent quite a few years working there as well. What sort of impact did Franklin have? And sadly, it's not there anymore. But what impact did it have on the culinary scene in Tasmania?
Oh, I worked at Franklin on 2 occasions. So I worked there probably within the first year and a half that they opened, and then I was working there the last kind of 6 to 7 months before it closed quite recently. And just to see how much the restaurant had changed and developed over that time was actually really lovely to see. But it's left a big hole in the hospitality scene in Hobart. I think people kind of going in there and, you know, we've got this beautiful space and this beautiful fit out, and the food's always excellent, and the Forbes's wine list was just off the charts incredible. I think it just kind of put Tasmania on the map of the food scene as, yes, we can compete with the big cities. We've got a serious, beautiful restaurant, 2 chef's hats. Like, we can compete, I think. And, pushing the boundaries with food that they were serving, I think made other restaurants feel like they can do that too, I suppose. So, the restaurants that opened in the time that Franklin opened, Fico, Die Maker, things like that, they kind of, came at the perfect time. Franklin was the trailblazer, rather.
You're now at Templo. Can you tell us a bit about that? It's a tiny little spot, but very popular.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I've been at Templo since June after Franklin closed. I had a few months in between. But, yeah, tiny restaurant on Patrick Street, just slightly on the outskirts of the CBD. We can pre-COVID, we'd seat, 25, 26 people, which if you see the space, that's quite an impressive amount of people to fit in there. You'd really be jammed in there. It was really cozy. But a restaurant that I love and have dined at many times in Hobart, my partner used to work in the kitchen there. So I've spent a lot of time around those guys. But now we're currently maximum of 16 people, just with our, the 2 square metre per person rule, which it's enough people to make the space feel comfortable and busy and fun. But obviously it is a bit of a loss to lose those 10 seats. But we've changed recently post-COVID to set menu only, where we've always done a set menu and a la carte. So kind of modern Australian with Italian influences. But the space itself is just so beautiful and warm, and we kind of just want to feel like, people are in our home, essentially. So food is always really tasty, using, local, seasonal produce, ethical meat, and, doing everything, making everything by hand, beautiful bread, ricotta and things like that. And I don't know, we just want everything to be delicious and comforting. And it's a really lovely space to work in. It's the only small restaurant I've ever worked in my life. I've always worked in quite big spaces, things people go out for a cigarette in the middle of the meal, come back in and you try and greet them. And they're like, hey, I've been eating here for like 2 hours. But at Templo, I get to speak to every single person that walks in the door, which is so nice. And I do the wine matches for the whole room, which sometimes can be, 16 people, but it can be interesting. And everyone comes at once, so two sittings a night, and then we do lunches a couple of days a week as well.
If you were hosting some out-of-towners to Hobart for a week, where would you take them? What would be the ultimate food experience?
If we're going to stick with just Hobart, I always tell people a week isn't enough. But if we're going to stick with just Hobart, I'd always go Pigeonhole Bakery for obvious reasons. Pastries, great coffee, maybe get a sandwich to take on a road trip. Outside of food, I'd always take people up the mountain for a walk, which is always my favourite place to go. Need to eat at Die Maker. The food that they're doing now is so great. They're similar to Templo. We've gone to set menu only. And also Kobe's little wine bar, which is in front of Die Maker, called Lucinda.
Oh,
really
yes.
Great wine list. Very dangerous. You can spend a lot of money there. And lovely snacks as well. Obviously, we'll go to Tom McHugo's probably multiple times. And the same thing, Tom McHugo's is, everyone just calls it the pub. So in, our friendship group and the hospitality industry in general, if you say, yep, let's go to the pub, there's never any question about which pub you mean. It's McHugo's. It's the home away from home. Great beers, really great wine. You can go and just have a palmy or a steak, or you can have some of Tom's beautiful vegetable dishes, which are always so crazy delicious, and my favourite thing there. Where else would we go? Well, I'd probably bring them to Templo, to be honest. and out to the agrarian kitchen. So they're just doing lunch a couple of days a week now, and they've got their little kiosk as well where you can get takeaways, pastries and sandwiches and stuff, and then set menu for lunch out there, which is, I got to go a couple of weeks ago and it was so great.
You mentioned that the loss of Franklin has left a big hole in the hospitality industry, but there's no doubt there's going to be a lot of local and regional travel in Australia over 2021. What's your expectations? Is it a real opportunity for Tasmania to sort of showcase what it can do to the rest of Australia?
I think so. Like, with our borders reopening within, the last couple of months, it's been a lot busier than I thought it was going to be. Like, we, obviously because we're limited capacity, we've been full regardless. But the amount of people that, we've turned away, and the people who are in town and who want to go out and they want to eat, it's, and that's kind of also, Franklin left a physical hole in terms of restaurant sizes, and, they could fit 100 people a night. So where are those 100 people going to go? I think it could be a very good opportunity for, new restaurants, new bars. I obviously I know it's a scary time in the world right now with the uncertainty, but I think people are still going to come. People still want to travel and spend money and eat and have a good time. So I think there is a lot of opportunity here, and hopefully some more, like you said, regional areas will get a bit of a taste. Like, obviously with Monofoma happens in Hobart and Launceston now. And,
Wow.
Lonnie's cool. Things are happening. We spent a couple of days up there a few weeks ago, and there's great restaurants opening, really nice places to eat, and it's actually just a beautiful city. Like, it's always been Hobart's kind of younger sister, I suppose, but I think there's a lot of opportunity in Launceston, and even just in, the country towns along the way. Why don't we have, restaurants like Bray and things like that are out of the city? Agrarian's a great example, but realistically it's only 45 minutes out of the city. But I don't know, I think more things like that would be really great for Hobart. People are always travelling on the East Coast and driving around, so it'd be nice to have somewhere to send people when they're in the state.
Well, I've travelled around Tasmania a couple of times and enjoyed the hospitality of the restaurants and the wineries, and it is extraordinary. And I think that you're going to have a great year, given the circumstances. Alice, we've loved having you on Deep in the Weeds. Good luck with the new year, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Anthony. Thanks for having me.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we share the stories of Australia's hospo community, suppliers and producers in search of hope during this pandemic. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.